Welcome to Silk Dark Secrets, where darkness tells its secrets. When innocence faded into shadows. An emotional love story. The canvas of yesterday. The evening sky was a bruised canvas of orange and violet, the colors bleeding into one another as the sun dipped below the horizon. Beneath the ancient peepal tree in the college courtyard, Aarav sat perfectly still. The autumn wind rustled the leaves overhead, casting shifting shadows across his face, but he didn't notice. His eyes, once vibrant, were fixed on the empty bench across the grass. There was a hollow, quiet stillness in his gaze now, as if the universe had gently reached down and dialed all the color out of his world. But time is a cruel thief, and Aarav had not always been a resident of the shadows. 3 years ago, his name was synonymous with life itself. Aarav was the kind of guy who commanded a room without ever asking for attention. He was effortlessly brilliant, a natural-born athlete whose presence on the college football field brought roaring crowds to their feet. He carried himself with an easy, magnetic confidence, and his smile was so entirely genuine that it acted like a mirror. Whoever saw it couldn't help but smile back. He was full of dreams, untouched by grief, and completely innocent to how quickly a heart could shatter. Then came the first day of college. The campus was a chaotic sea of noise and nervous energy. New faces collided in the hallways, laughter echoed off the lockers, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh notebooks and rain-soaked earth. Aarav stepped into his morning lecture hall, laughing at a joke a teammate had just made, his shoulder bag slung carelessly over one arm. He was in his element. But as he walked down the stepped aisle of the classroom, the noise around him suddenly seemed to fade into a dull hum. His eyes locked onto the third row, right next to the wide glass window. A girl was sitting there alone. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, playing softly with the stray strands of her hair, casting a faint glow around her profile. She was completely tuned out from the surrounding chatter, her head bowed gracefully over a thick journal as she scribbled down notes. Her name was Anaya. If Aarav was the force of the crowded fields, Anaya was the quiet brilliance of the laboratory. She was a top-tier science student, possessing a sharp, analytical mind that looked at the world through a lens of wonder and logic. Yet, there was nothing cold about her intelligence. It was in her eyes, a quiet, unmistakable sparkle that set her apart from everyone else. She wasn't loud, nor did she seek the spotlight, but the rare times she did smile, it carried a warmth so honest and pure that it felt like stepping into the sun. As Aarav stood in the aisle, watching a stray sunbeam catch the edge of her notebook, something shifted imperceptibly in the room. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know the sound of her voice, or how deeply she would come to change him. But as he took a seat just a few rows away, keeping his eyes on the quiet girl by the window, a beautiful, tragic story quietly turned its very first page. The Shield and the Scientist. It didn't take long for Aarav and Anaya's world to collide. What started as stolen glances across a crowded lecture hall quickly turned into a quiet, comfortable routine. They were an unlikely pair to the rest of the campus, the star football player whose laughter echoed across the fields, and the brilliant science student who spent her free hours surrounded by the smell of old pages and chemical formulas. Yet, when they were together, the noise of the world seemed to dial back, leaving just a peaceful harmony between them. Anaya was a force of nature when it came to physics and chemistry. She could explain the complex mechanics of a universe in motion with a passionate light in her eyes that entirely captivated Aarav. But she had an ultimate, undisputed nemesis, Professor Mishra and his dreaded morning history lecture. To Anaya, history was a chaotic, disorganized maze of dates and ancient political treaties that lacked the elegant logic of science. To make matters worse, Professor Mishra was a notoriously strict man who took immense pleasure in catching sleeping or distracted students off guard. "Ah, Miss Anaya." Professor Mishra's voice boomed through the silent classroom, his spectacles sliding down his nose as his eyes locked onto her. Anaya, who had been secretly sketching a chemical structure in the margins of her notebook, froze. "Since you seem so deeply invested in your notes, perhaps you can enlighten the class on the exact year the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and its primary territorial consequence for Germany." Anaya's heart sunk. A faint flush of panic crept up her neck. She opened her mouth, her mind frantically grasping at empty air. Before the silence could stretch into an embarrassment, a voice spoke up from the desk right next to her. 1919, Sir, Aarav said smoothly, leaning back in his chair with a casual, confident smile. And Germany was forced to cede Alsace-Lorraine back to France, alongside losing all of its overseas colonies. Professor Mishra's eyebrows shot up. He blinked, clearly annoyed that his prey had been rescued. He adjusted his glasses and glared at Aarav. "I believe I directed that question to Miss Anaya, Mr. Aarav." "My apologies, Professor," Aarav replied, his tone perfectly respectful but carrying a subtle, protective edge. "The row was a bit loud, and I thought you were looking at both of us. I just couldn't resist answering a question about my favorite historical era." Mishra grumbled under his breath, unable to argue with a perfectly accurate answer, and turned back to the blackboard. Underneath the desk, out of the teacher's line of sight, Anaya let out a long, shaky breath. She turned her head slightly toward Aarav, her eyes wide with immense relief. Slipping her hand under the desk, she gently nudged his knee with her knuckles. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Aarav just flashed her a quick wink, a dimple appearing on his cheek, before looking back at the board as if nothing had happened. It became their unspoken contract. Whenever Mishra's shadow loomed, Aarav became her human shield, memorizing textbook chapters he barely cared about just to ensure she never had to face the teacher's wrath. Later that afternoon, the heavy monsoon clouds finally broke, pouring a torrential downpour over the college courtyard. While other students rushed for the main exit, Aarav and Anaya found themselves stranded under the small awning of the college canteen. The air was thick with the rich, comforting scent of frying samosas and hot cardamom tea. "You are ridiculous. You know that," Anaya said, though a soft, bright smile played on her lips. She was holding a warm paper cup of tea between her hands, watching the rain bounce violently off the asphalt. "You don't even like history." "I don't," Aarav admitted, leaning his shoulder against the brick wall, his eyes fixed entirely on her profile. "But I really don't like seeing you stress out over dead kings. Besides, your face gets all panicked, and it ruins your focus on saving the world with science." Anaya laughed, a sound that Aarav thought belonged in a song. She took a step closer to the edge of the awning, stretching out her hand to let the cool raindrops pool in her palm. "Science explains the rain, Aarav. The evaporation, the condensation. It's all a perfect cycle. But looking at it like this, it just feels like the world is hitting a reset button. Like it washes away all the noise and heavy thoughts." Aarav didn't look at the rain. He looked at the way a stray drop had caught on her eyelashes, and how the grey afternoon light made her eyes look incredibly deep. "Yeah," Aarav whispered softly, his voice dropping a fraction. "It does." Anaya turned her head, sensing the shift in his tone. For a long, breathless moment, their eyes locked. The chaotic sound of the storm around them seemed to fade into a distant hum. Aarav felt a sudden, terrifyingly beautiful pull in his chest, a sudden urge to reach out, to brush a stray lock of wet hair away from her face, to tell her that he would gladly study every history book in the world if it meant keeping her safe. Breaking the spell, Anaya suddenly giggled, a faint blush warming her cheeks as she looked down at her tea. "You have a speck of flour on your nose from the canteen counter. By the way, Mr. Hero." Aarav blinked, completely thrown off, and quickly rubbed his face, laughing self-consciously. "Wait, did I? Did you let me stand here looking like a fool this whole time?" "Maybe for a few minutes," she teased, stepping closer and using the corner of a clean napkin to gently dab at the side of his nose. Her touch was feather-light, and her proximity sent a sudden rush of adrenaline through Aarav's veins that no football match ever could. As she pulled back, her eyes shining with that pure, innocent happiness, Aarav smiled a genuine, brilliant smile. He knew, right then and there under the leaking tin roof of a college canteen, that he was completely, entirely helpless against her. For the complete story, visit Silk Dark Secrets, or wait for the second part. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with future stories and uploads.